webinar on the subject of exploring solutions to pupillage problems. There are certainly quite a few known difficulties with the pupillage system. It's quite shocking to me that, according to a Bar Standards Board report, all of the students enrolled on the Bar Professional Training course between 2014 and 2018, of all of those, only 43% had secured pupillage by March 2020. And I know members of BACFI will be very familiar with some of the obstacles to employed barristers trying to help by offering employed pupillage. So on behalf of BACFI, I'm very pleased to introduce 3 speakers who will share ideas about how to improve the current situation. To introduce them, first of all, Stephen Ward, Managing Director of Clerksroom Chambers, which has over 200 barristers. Stephen founded Clerksroom in 2001 and has now been in Chambers, and that includes undertaking pupillage administration for 35 years. Second, we're joined by Michaela Hardwick, who practiced as a solicitor for 12 years before launching Beyond Compliance in 2012. She now specialises in regulatory compliance for barristers and solicitors. Michaela is also a regulatory compliance officer and pupillage coordinator for Clerksroom. And third, we're joined by Chelsea Sparks, a New York attorney, a pupil barrister with Clerksroom, and also a consultant with Beyond Compliance. Chelsea came to the bar from a non-traditional background and has recently navigated the pupillage process. So I'm hoping she'll provide us that very valuable perspective of the young aspiring barrister. Without further ado, Stephen, Michaela and Chelsea, over to you.
Thank you, David, for an excellent introduction. So briefly, as the invitation states, the directors of Clerksroom hope to gain authorisation from the BSB for a charitable entity, the Pupillage Academy, as an AETO. This will be established using the director's own funds in the first instance. We are still in discussion with the BSB in terms of authorisation, having submitted our application in February last year. Now, subject to that approval, one of the ambitions of the Pupillage Academy is to provide support to organisations and chambers who feel that they're presently excluded from being able to offer pupillage due to the prohibitive regulatory and cost requirements. The purpose of this workshop is that we felt it would be vital to have some insight from those at the employed bar to explore the current challenges and whether the Pupillage Academy could provide any support. Stephen, Chelsea and I have been working on the project for some time, and we each bring interesting and different perspectives. So what we'd like to do is start with a brief introduction from each of us. However, this is intended to be an open workshop for you to share your challenges and questions. So after that brief word, we'll throw things open to you. Feel free to raise the hand icon if you want to speak, or put comments and questions in the chat facility. We're happy to take both. Equally, if you want to turn your videos on, we have no objections to that. Sometimes it's actually nice to see the audience as well as hear them appropriately. Stephen, can I first turn to you and ask you to share your perspective and where you're coming from on this, please?
Okay, thank you, Michaela. I mean, the first thing I would just like to say is that I haven't prepared a 10, 15, 20-minute speech or anything. I've been asked to come along and share my views, and I'm doing that completely off the cuff because I always feel that's the most sort of comfortable way of doing it. And if someone wants to stop me and ask me a question about anything I say, then you know, you're more than welcome. But I think, you know, this is a huge topic, and I'm going to go hopefully straight to the points that people are interested in rather than spending too long. I mean, the purpose of the evening is to explore solutions to pupillage problems, and that rather assumes that we're all accepting there is a problem. I think the question of what is the problem that we're trying to solve is quite large, because I think, when, you know, this is my personal view, but when you think about all the different stakeholders involved, from the pupil to the Inns of Court to the Bar Council, Bar Standards Board, the chambers, members of BACFI, or everyone that's involved, the training organisations themselves, they all look at what the perceived problem is from a different angle. And my biggest problem, which I feel I sort of must say, because it's really, really important to me before we move on to the solutions, is I think everybody is coming at it from a different angle. And I don't, the negative side of all this, if you like, is that I don't see a solution for getting everybody to talk to each other. That's the biggest hurdle that I think revolutionising pupillage faces. So I'm saying that because I think that that's the bit that depresses me most. But when we move on to what are the potential solutions and the more interesting stuff, it's just clear that I'm only talking from my own perspective and from a chamber's perspective. So, you know, lots of discussion needs to be had. But from my point of view, I've been doing pupillage administration for 35 years. And in my opinion, there are three different aspects: the regulation, the cost of it, and the administration of pupillage. And those three things can be prohibitive to any organisation or chambers. I'll probably say chambers a lot, but I do mean any organisation that wants to take a pupil. And the difficulty is, I think that there's a perception that chambers are, you know, these big organisations with lots of money and loads of organisation and loads of staff, when the reality is chambers is a group of individuals, self-employed barristers, who share the cost of their administration. And if they want to take a pupil, the stakeholders are the pupil supervisor, who, you know, I get in trouble for saying it's voluntary, but, you know, in my opinion, the pupil supervisor is volunteering to do it. Volunteering as in they are not paid. So whoever is providing the training is really doing it on an unpaid basis. And that tends to be a self-employed sole practitioner barrister who is extremely busy. I mean, I can see Andrew Thornhill's on the call. He'd like to take a pupil, but he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart. And I can't honestly believe there is any other way of looking at it. So, you know, you're relying, the current situation relies on pupil supervisors giving up hundreds of hours of their time. The chambers providing the administration, which means normally paying for an administrator, which is a cost. Then obviously you've got regulatory compliance and applying for the ATO and all that sort of thing, which is quite a burden in terms of time and cost. And then you've got the actual grant of funding the pupil. Well, where do people think that comes from? That comes from the individual barristers who get no return on that investment whatsoever. You know, I've heard an argument that, well, yes, but then that pupil qualifies. But, you know, Chelsea is a pupil. She will qualify. She's qualified as a self-employed barrister. She is. There is no way that a chambers can contractually keep that person. I would never in a million years want to try and contractually bind Chelsea to staying. I'd like her to stay in chambers because she wants to be there, not because of contractually bound. So all of these problems are reality. And in the last 35 years that I've been doing pupillage administration, I've never heard these problems openly discussed. And they're all just things that go on in chambers. And when you say, why aren't there enough pupillages at the bar? It's because of all these problems. And the only way that you can do something about it is to tackle the problems and admit that they actually exist, is my opinion. So on the positive side of all that, when you break down all of these problems and you start looking at how could you solve these problems, I personally think it's relatively straightforward. There's a cost issue. There's a burden of administration, there's regulatory compliance. But the Pupillage Academy, the reason that we want to set it up as a charity, as a completely independent body, is because we can then have an administrator who can deal with pupillage administration for more than one chambers. So it's a sharing of the burden of cost. And because we're a charity, we can go out and collect some money from people. We've got quite a few people saying they'd be happy to put some money in the pot. So actually, I don't believe the finance would be a big issue. The regulatory compliance would be so much easier, because instead of 350 organisations, AETOs, trying to go through the burden of administration, the Pupillage Academy can comply with the burden of administration, invest in software and technology to make sure that we are compliant, and not even being compliant, being better than compliant, being innovative and forward thinking. So what I'm trying to say is it's not all doom and gloom, but we've got to be open to what the problems are, and we've got to be open to innovation, and we've got to be open to thinking that there is actually a different way. And I think, you know, even a lot of the bar, probably 50% of the bar would say there's no problem with the current system. So, you know, that anyway, I've probably said enough. That's my perspective. Michaela can talk about the regulatory framework, and then Chelsea can talk about the practicalities that that are faced. But is there any sort of questions arising out of what I've said? I mean, my view is my own view, so. No.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So I do want to turn to Chelsea next, if I can, Chelsea, and then I'll finish up with the regulatory stuff, and we can move into the questions. So can I turn over to you, Chelsea?
Of course, thank you, Michaela. Good evening, everyone. Stephen's done a fantastic job of highlighting some of the problems that organisations and chambers face. And as someone that's recently navigated the pupillage process, I'll spend a little bit of time just going through some of the issues with the current system, and giving it a bit more of a perspective from a previous applicant. I would say the biggest problem, and one which is quite glaringly obvious, is the limited spaces. This has only worsened since the pandemic, and interestingly, I was looking at some BSV data today, and in 2020 only 386 pupillages were registered, and that was down by 35% compared with the previous year. So that's quite daunting, I think, or that's what I thought when I had a look at it. It obviously costs quite a bit of money and effort and time and hard work to qualify and get to the position that you can make pupillage applications, and to then leave that process and realise that actually there's not enough pupillages available. It is quite shocking, and that's not to say that I think that everyone that successfully completes the bar course should be offered a pupillage. I think it's important that we still maintain high standards, but I feel really passionately about improving the amount of pupillages available. Secondly, I think one of the issues faced by the current system is one of accessibility. We know that the bar still has a very long way to go when it comes to accessibility and EDI and those types of problems. And I think the pupillage process is no exception to that. In particular, one of the barriers that I think feeds into that is the introduction of the mandatory timetable. So what that's done is it's pushed the application process, or condensed the application process into a few short months rather than having it spread out. So for instance, applications are in January, and then February until sort of the end of April are interviews, and then offers usually the 6th of May. And how that becomes a problem with accessibility is this. You've got applicants that are studying, and you've got applicants that are working alongside studying or working full time, and that might be to fund the bar, or to continue to fund their life. Often pupils are getting, or more often than not, pupils are getting older and older, and obviously life continues even though we're still trying to get pupillage. So having this magic timetable puts you in a position where you have to take time off of work if you're employed, or turn down contracts if you're self-employed, so that you can fulfill these application needs. Squeeze within that month, it makes it really difficult for people, even more so if they're self-employed. They're not going to get paid for that time off, and even worse if they're also studying alongside that as well. So if you are in a position where you're self-funding, and you haven't got assistance from family or other sources, it does make the bar inaccessible, or certainly a lot more difficult than the other applicants in the process. As a result, it means that some people don't make as many applications, or the standard of the application that they're submitting isn't as good because of their circumstances. So that's another thing that I think the current system it needs resolving within the current system. And then finally, the process itself, I would say, can be very, very draining on your mental health, your emotional health, to put so much time and effort into these applications, whilst taking on volunteer positions and doing mooting and debating and all the things that you have to do to get yourself to the position that you can apply. That's draining in and of itself, but then to have the rejections that come piling in, and without any feedback, it can feel really frustrating as an applicant, to have absolutely no idea what it is that you did wrong or how you can improve in the future. And to continue to go through that process every yearly cycle, without feeling as though you're improving or getting any feedback, is really disheartening and discouraging. And I think these people that are applying are potentially going to be junior members of the bar. And I think we really need to do a better job of welcoming in new barristers to the profession, rather than knocking down their confidence and making them feel deflated. So that's just sort of a summary of the issues that I have found navigating the process. But I'll pass back to Michaela, who I think will go through some regulatory matters for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us. From my perspective, when I was first introduced to Stephen and I heard his vision for the Pupillage Academy, very soon I saw his passion and ambition for the project, and I have to say I was very delighted to be on board for it. Stephen and some others within Clerksroom had already put some work into it. With my regulatory compliance background, I could then look at helping to put the appropriate policies in place and forming the basis for the AETO application. And naturally, the first port of call was the BSB authorisation framework, which governs everything that all AETOs do. And that includes those providing the vocational component, as well as work-based learning, pupillage, and the academic component. And there are 4 overarching principles, which most of you may know: flexibility, accessibility, affordability, and high standards. So rather than go through the entire process that we went through, I just want to sort of go through and highlight what really sort of guided our application and the potential and opportunities that we saw which could arise from the authorisation framework. So in particular, in terms of the flexibility principle, the authorisation framework states that it specifically encourages innovation in how education and training is delivered. It goes on to state that flexibility for AETOs includes innovation in education and training, for example, the use of the latest technology, enhanced learning and e-learning. Now, from Clerksroom's perspective, that's great because 20 years ago, Stephen started building a virtual chambers based on technology. So Clerksroom were far ahead of the game in terms of the type of systems and e-learning that could be delivered and created. Moving on to the accessibility principle, as Chelsea highlighted, it's been increasingly acknowledged that the bar is known for being elite and closed off to many individuals, and the BSB has an objective to create a bar that better reflects and can meet the changing needs of the society it serves. Through its 20-year history, Clerksroom has naturally developed into a very accessible and inclusive organisation. So again, the opportunity was there for Clerksroom to bring this extensive culture and experience to pupillage in a wider sense. In terms of the affordability principle, when we examined that, what we looked at was we felt that affordability was intrinsically linked to accessibility. The strategy we had at Clerksroom was to maintain the mandatory financial award for pupillage at that level. This would therefore allow further pupillages or increased number of pupillages to be facilitated. It's a simple number of maths. Do you pay one pupil 60 grand or do you pay 3 pupils 20 grand and give them more opportunities? So the views, though, is in terms of affordability, that is a far wider challenge that needs to be addressed by the whole of the profession, looking at making sure that there is an increased awareness of the high level of competition at the outset of an individual's journey. As Chelsea has already highlighted, there are significant challenges there that are faced at the outset of the journey. You've got a lot of individuals who reach a point where they are so entrenched in becoming a barrister that when it doesn't happen, they just become completely deflated. Now, it's a discussion for another time, but I see in the future the possibility of the apprenticeship route actually being a solution to some of that. And then finally, the high standards principle. Well, to our mind, that was a given, but what we identified as a real benefit and opportunity was the consistency of standards that criteria could bring, particularly when pupillage is clearly now stated to make sure that pupils can develop and demonstrate the competencies in the professional statement. And again, what the Pupillage Academy can bring to this is consistency across the board of standards. Now, that's going to be increasingly important in the future, as the Legal Services Board will no doubt be introducing some form of continuing competency measures for all regulated professionals as a result of their current consultation. I've attended some of the consultation meetings, and it is beyond doubt that some form of continuing competence measures will be introduced. It's too early to say what, but there will be something. Where we stand at the moment is that, as Chelsea alluded to, we actually have serious concerns that the current mandatory timetable is inconsistent with the principles of flexibility and accessibility. We've only got anecdotal evidence, although an awful lot of it, to support the impact this has on prospective pupils, as Chelsea herself has shared. But in the coming days, we're going to be launching an anonymous survey aimed at those seeking pupillage so that we can gather as much information as we can about the experiences, concerns and challenges of those going through the process. And we're going to share the results of that survey widely across the profession. It's something that we're doing so that we can actually gather data for everybody to use rather than just for us to use individually. We do want to similarly prepare the similar survey for organisations, so the employed bar, law firms and chambers who provide pupillage, to again gather the same sort of information. And again, we're happy to share that widely. So I think that's probably enough from me. What I would like to do is open the workshop up to the floor. We look forward to hearing any comments, concerns, questions you have, and an idea of what you would like to see for the future in terms of how we can solve this pupillage problem. As mentioned, if you want to use the chat facility to raise your hand, use the comment, or if you aren't sure on using either of those facilities, just pop your hand up and we'll sort of take some questions from here. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not well versed on the chat function, so I'll just speak if that's all right.
Of course.
It's a bit low tech, but it works.
Indeed.
Thank you for all of those insights and perspectives. I was hoping that you could explain if I, as an employed barrister, wanted to take on a pupil, how would Pupillage Academy help practically? If I came to you, what would you be able to do to help me to bring on a pupil?
Well, the way that we are looking at operating it is to basically be able to operate the various stages. Of course, this is all subject to BSB approval, but what we could do is we could look at going straight from the advertising side of things. So you could tell us the candidate, the type of candidate that you're looking to take on. We could look at creating the relevant criteria to make sure that there's a fair selection process. We could undertake the advertising. We could run the selection process if you so chose us to do that. Alternatively, you could do your own. What you would then have is access. Once the pupil starts, we could help with the process of making sure that the recruitment process is run compliantly. Once the pupillage begins, we would then have an online training system which basically allows you to manage and run your pupillage effectively, so such as providing the facility for what a lot of people tend to call a pupil diary, so somewhere for the pupil to record their learning and experience and measure it directly against the competencies in the pupil, the professional statement, which doesn't happen naturally at the moment. It allows us to identify, the system can identify gaps in learnings and flag that up to supervisors. It will set certain tasks and examples of mock exercises of work for pupils and for pupil supervisors. It will diary and prompt systems for having appraisals. It will support use of other pupil supervisors if needs be. So it will basically, the system can manage the pupillage in a compliant way so that you can have those systems rather than having to create your own internal systems. Does that help?
So it does. So does it follow that the Pupillage Academy would be the AETO and I would be simply paying them and providing the training and the work?
Absolutely.
Without holding regulatory responsibilities?
Yes, although as pupil supervisor, you would still have the regulatory responsibilities as the pupil supervisor.
Right, that does sound helpful, because my experience is that obviously, being an employed barrister, if I have a conversation with my organisation around hiring someone, the answer is, well, for every £1 we spend on them, how many do we get back? And if that mathematically makes sense, then it's generally straightforward. Where it becomes a problem is if I then say, oh, and by the way, there's a whole mountain of regulation which you're on the hook for, and in addition, you probably don't comply with it anyway because you have your own HR policies, you don't have BSB approved HR policies, and so on. So to be able to delegate or share some of the responsibility for regulatory compliance would be my main issue.
Absolutely. And in terms of the policies and so forth, of course, as part of the AETO process, we will have already had those approved by the BSB. So essentially, the organisation could adapt those. Naturally, and as we've explained to the BSB in our application, we would need to have, as the Pupillage Academy, robust audit mechanisms. We would want to provide the pupil supervisor training so that we can be certain that there was consistency of training. But again, that brings us back to the consistency and the support to the smaller organisations. Yeah. So we have a question in the chat from Samim. do you have a sense of when you will hear from the BSB reapproval determination? The short answer is no, we don't. The longer answer is, well, we are in discussion, and we've had, I think we're on our third round of questions at the moment. I will be honest, the ball is currently in our court, particularly as Sophie and Sam from the BSB are on the call. The ball is in our court at the moment to provide some answers to questions. The reality, though, is from a Clerksroom and Pupillage Academy perspective, this is something that we will only be in a position to undertake if it meets the requirements of what we want to deliver. Stephen can add to this if he wants to, but he's certainly been upfront to say, well, actually, this is a charitable venture. We want to do it, but we want to do it in the right way and on the right terms.
Yeah, I mean, just to add something, David, I mean, you know, hearing you speaking frankly about, you know, the way it works in your organization and the fact it is a commercial organization, it's really nice to hear somebody say that, because, you know, that's a lot of what's not said very often. And, you know, the reason we want to make it a charity is to make it absolutely blunt to everybody that we're not making any money. No one will make any money out of this. That is absolutely not the purpose. And if my driver is really, I'm looking to retire next year from Clerksroom, and if I step back and retire and Harry Hodgkin steps down as head of chambers and retires as well, you know, what is it that we have not succeeded in doing in the last 35 years since I've been doing my job? And that is really professionalizing pupillage. It's just been done in a, you know, I could be quite disrespectful, but, you know, I speak to people in chambers all day, every day, and we all face the same problems and everybody muddles through. And therefore this perception that there's nothing wrong with the system is mad to me. So I want to be putting all of our skill together. We're happy to fund it. That's not the problem. We'll put the money into a pot and we'll build the software that will enable you to sign up your pupil, know that you've got compliance for the BSB and the Bar Council and everybody who's a stakeholder to know that that pupillage is being really well run. And I'm not talking about, Michaela will look at the 4 areas, but I'm looking at more than that. I'm saying, well, you know, are we checking with the pupil that they're okay all the time? You know, some people masters will, some won't. Do they have you know, a helpline they can ring to say, I'm really not very happy with the way David's treating me. It's 12 o'clock at night and he's told me this has got to be done by 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, and by the way, I'm a single mum with a baby and I haven't been home. You know, all these things are reality, and we just want to do them to a high standard, but in a way that shares. There's no point in doing that work just for us. You know, we could do it for Clerksroom and be seen as being the best pupillage provider in the country at Clerksroom, and we get a badge. Great, but that doesn't tick a box for me. What I want to do is increase the standard of pupillage, and, you know, there's a whole big question here. Do we need, you know, is Chelsea said 35% of people got pupillage, but I'm still stuck on the question of, is there a need for more pupillages? I think the answer must be yes, but I don't know that that's true. I still don't, because there is no set number of pupillages. Is the problem that 65% of people are being put on a bar course with no prospect of getting pupillage? Is 350 pupillages the right number? I don't know. That's just not for me to answer that question. But whatever is the optimum number of pupillages, they should be administered in a better way, in my opinion, and in a more consistent way.
Thank you, Stephen. So we've got a couple of questions. First, I will go to Rose, if that's okay. So welcome, Rose.
Hi, thank you. I had a question about whether there is kind of enough work. It kind of follows on from what you were saying, Stephen. Is there enough work at the end of pupillage for the amount of pupillages that you might envisage? Because I think, as you touched upon, Stephen, if we're moving the funnel kind of from the end of the vocational component to the end of pupillage, then we need to think about whether barristers can then at that point build a practice with kind of quality paid work. So I'd be interested to know what the panelists' kind of response to that is.
If you don't mind, I'll start off on that. I know Stephen may have his own thoughts. This actually is a topic that's very, very close to my heart. It's something Chelsea and I did a paper a little while ago about the apprenticeship route, and as part of that exercise, what we looked at was what sort of work is being done by those who haven't yet secured pupillage, and the clear evidence to us, albeit anecdotal, is that actually there's lots of legal work being done out there by people who want to be barristers but aren't yet. That equally applies to solicitors. So I think the answer is that yes, there is plenty of legal work that can be done. It is a question of whether that is done by somebody who has to be done by somebody who has the title of a barrister, has the title of a solicitor, or whether it could be done by somebody on their way to becoming one or the other, or something completely different. So I think the reality is that there is plenty of work there. What we have seen is that a number of organisations have popped up filling the gap with in-chambers hearings. So for example, the likes of LPC Law, and arguably, they have identified the gap created by the Legal Services Act and pinched some of the work that would traditionally have been barristers. My perhaps tongue-in-cheek comment is, well, is that because solicitors were more innovative than barristers at the time, and perhaps barristers need to really sort of grasp the innovation? So I think the answer is that yes, the work is there. It is just a question of identifying ways in which to do that work. And it may be that the traditional chambers model is not necessarily completely fit for that. From Clerksroom's perspective, Clerksroom has no limit on numbers of members. And perhaps if I let Stephen speak to that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, you can only give a view on that topic, on that question, because the marketplace will decide. And I can only give my own opinion that there is more work out there than anyone can do, and particularly with direct access really taking off. It's a 20 billion pound marketplace, and we're currently taking about 1.6 billion from it. So there's an enormous amount of work. This is why I keep coming back to the question of somebody somewhere needs to have a rough idea of what the number of pupils that should be going through the bar course, what is an acceptable failure rate, because not everyone will succeed, and how many pupillages should be available. And I asked the chairman of the bar that question this morning, and he said the Bar Council simply don't have a view. It's just let the market decide. But is there work that there's a lot of things that barristers don't do, and Michaela's made a very good point that the traditional chambers model, which is a collection of self-employed individuals with a very, very small marketing budget, are not well placed to market themselves to do that. We've done particularly well with the public access, but it's hard. It's hard. You've got to get out there. But if you have the resource, you can always sell the resource. Does that answer your question, or does that not sound like we've answered it?
No, it does to a great extent. I think I'm not convinced that it's possible to know what the number of pupils there should be, because there are so many factors that would go into it. I personally think that there should probably be more pupils, because as we've seen with the backlog, that just taking that as one example, sometimes solicitors are finding it difficult to find people to cover cases, but there's so much that goes into that. You still need the court space and that kind of thing, but yeah, I just think it's a very difficult one to have a clear answer to, but thank you both for your points.
Thank you, Rose. I think the only other point I would add on that is that the BSB's strategy for the next 3 years does actually highlight that we are facing an ageing bar. So whilst it may not be a problem today, in 20 years there might be a significant problem as to whether there are enough barristers to represent those that need it. So, but anyway, sorry, moving on, we've got another question. Daryl, would you like to?
There's some in the
Yep.
chat as well, Michaela.
Okay,
Hi.
thank you. Hello, Daryl.
Hi, just a couple of comments and some questions. I think Chelsea was absolutely right in terms of the Gateway timetable, and if I'd go further and say the Gateway itself is actually doing the complete opposite of what it's aimed to do. I think when chambers get 300 applications, many of which are cut and paste, it then actually creates so much noise that they fall back and go for a typical, if I could use that terminology, a typical applicant rather than an atypical applicant who might just get swallowed up in that noise. But to my question, it was actually something that David asked, and I'll put it to him and Michaela. You mentioned if I or my organisation wanted to offer a pupillage. One of the perceptions I have of the employed bar and sort of the BACFI organisational structure would be that those sorts of organisations wouldn't want to be going through a general advertising process. They might have an employee or a particular sort of employee they'd like to find and potentially put through a pupillage process, but that's unlikely to be on a gateway type process. And that falls foul of a whole pile of BSB requirements. And I think that's a problem to the employed bar offering the pupillages. All the things that this Pupillage Academy is trying to solve aside, that's a great service model. I don't know that that's the problem as far as BACFI membership is concerned, though. It's part of the problem, but I don't think it's the main one in terms of their lack of appetite to offer pupillages. So I'd appreciate any comment and feedback on that.
Michaela, may I jump in on that?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, Daryl, I think you've hit upon two things, and I think we just all want to be really clear about this because, we as long as we're clear, it's fine. One of the modules, if you like, with the Pupillage Academy would be fair recruitment. Now, if you're saying your company has fair recruitment and you have chosen someone and they are an employee and you meet all of that complete standard, then the Pupillage Academy would facilitate the pupillage for you. What we would say is this is the modules. So you would say we're not asking you to do the fair recruitment. We've done that, and we must get a guarantee from you that you have done that, and that will be Michaela's area. That's not for me. I'm just looking at that through rose-tinted glasses. Then we say, what about funding? And you say, yeah, no problem with funding. We can put the 20,000 into the Pupillage Academy, and we say fine. And then we facilitate the pupillage in line with all of the pupillage standards. So it's like the modules. A BACFI member can say, yes, I'd like to, but we would have to have assurances that the modules that you're taking on, there'd probably be there will be a contract between us and your firm to say that you are, at the end of the day, the BSB and everyone involved needs to know exactly who is responsible for each element of this, and we must take overall responsibility for that as the AETO. So we can't I'm just being really, really clear. Nobody can circumnavigate fair recruitment. That's half the problem of pupillage.
Absolutely. And I think what I would add to that, Daryl, is that there is still scope within the rules to actually apply for the waivers from the advertising provisions in appropriate circumstances. And from the BSB's perspective, the key to that is being able to support why taking on that particular individual meets the requirements of the authorisation framework. So if you can look and satisfy yourselves that actually by taking this person on, you're looking at the flexibility principle, you're looking at the accessibility principle, you're dealing with the affordability principle and the high standard principle. And as long as you can satisfy yourself that all of those things have been met, that essentially covers the criteria within the BSB process for applying for a waiver from the advertising requirements. It may be that that one of the individuals attending from the BSB want to add to that, but that is my experience, is that yes, as Stephen has said, fair recruitment is the key, but that doesn't say that there aren't exceptions to that. It's just a case of, well, can you justify that though that exception still satisfies the criteria within the authorisation framework?
Sure. Although I'd argue every roadblock you put up decreases the likelihood of pupillage. But I don't know if David wants to jump in on whether my original assertion was valid, at least in terms of a commercial outlook on offering a pupillage.
Yes, I very much agree with your point. The gateway doesn't help. It's yet another deterrent, because a commercial organisation is going to advertise for a vacancy when it arises, when the need arises. It's not going to wait until the advertising window opens in November. It's also going to potentially have its own internal rules to follow. So, for example, the organisation might need to advertise internally first to follow its own procedures. All these little details are incompatible with the rules on their face. Now, it may be you can get waivers, but the problem is no organisation is going to go through the whole process of identifying where all the needs for waivers are, then applying for waivers, taking the risk that you don't get them, when by comparison you could just get in a trainee solicitor, or you could get in a paralegal to do the same job. It doesn't make sense. Now, this example you've highlighted, Darryl, of the Pupillage Gateway is one of a number which we at BACFI have identified. We've actually put a list to BSB of what we see as some of the obstacles to offering pupillage within employment, and the BSB, to their great credit, are considering those and are engaging on them, and we're very grateful for their attention on that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you both. So we've got a couple of comments and questions in the chat. Divya has said, is the Pupillage Academy an effort to only train pupils? I'm not quite sure what the meaning of that is, but perhaps if I look at the two possibilities, are we looking at only training pupils? Well, yes, the intention will be that the Pupillage Academy itself will only train pupils and won't, certainly in the first instance, actually deliver legal services. So it won't be a regulated entity in that sense. However, with the close links to Clerksroom, individuals who undertake their pupillage with Clerksroom, in the majority of instances, it's automatic, because Clerksroom doesn't have a limited number of membership. If you've completed pupillage, you will always be invited to apply for membership through the same process as everyone else. And in terms of any pupillages which the Pupillage Academy supports for other organisations, the same principles would apply as normal. If it's the second aspect of, is the Pupillage Academy only to train pupils as opposed to other types of individuals? Yes, pupils as opposed to trainee solicitors, etc. So Divya, I hope that has answered the question. Then we've got Gaynor has said pupil supervisors in some commercial organisations may not be able to provide all the elements of experience needed, e.g. in-court experience. Might this also facilitate a pupil spending time with different pupil supervisors to gain a better rounded pupillage? You can probably see Stephen frantically nodding his head. Yes, absolutely. That is one of the benefits that we would see from the Pupillage Academy. And Ravi has said, very good points raised. I qualified as a solicitor before joining the bar. The SRA has now made it easier, reformed the way to qualify as a solicitor. The BSB must do likewise. Ravi, I wholeheartedly agree. And Sophie from the BSB has said, for those who haven't already seen the documents, the funding and advertising waiver form and guidelines are available on the BSB website. We are also happy to discuss potential waiver applications in advance of their submission. Catherine says, as someone who has just finished the bar course, was called to the bar in November, comes from a non-law and non-UK background and is currently completing pupillage applications this year. This is my second round. I wanted to say thank you to you, Chelsea, for stating how negative the application process can be. I know at least 4 people from my course who were feeling so discouraged that they've decided not to make pupillage applications this year. I am really sorry to hear that, Catherine. And what I would say for you and any others who you interact with, connect with either myself, Chelsea, or Stephen on LinkedIn, and we can open up a world of connections and contacts who can help and discuss things. And
Michaela, can I just
of course
as well to Catherine's comment? That's pretty much how I felt within the last round of pupillage applications, and it really does get to that point where you do think, can I continue to put myself through this? And I think, as Michaela said, reach out, connect with us. If there's anything I can do in terms of practical help, I'll try my best. And I know it's definitely been more difficult since COVID and the pandemic, and not having that opportunity to network and connect and speak to people. So I'm more than happy to help in that respect as well. I know Daryl mentioned about the Pupillage Gateway, and this is something that I really struggled with as well. So just briefly, I qualified in New York as an attorney and transferred back. I don't have any lawyers in my family or any connections other than those that I've made myself. I came from quite a non-traditional route to get to the bar, and I must confess I found the Pupillage Gateway completely just not, it's not set out in a way that was made for someone that didn't fit within a box. There wasn't the option for me to put in some of my qualifications. I did the bar transfer test. There wasn't the option for that. There wasn't really the correct area for me to detail some of the experience that I'd had. So I completely understand why some people find it frustrating. And I agree with what Daryl said about it just tends to be so many applications that there's a lot of noise, and people get missed. And I also think if you haven't gone down that traditional route that seem to be expected by traditional chambers, some members can't seem to get their head around what you've done or why you've done it, and sometimes I've almost had the innovation looked at with very confused looks. So I completely agree. I don't think the Pupillage Gateway is appropriate for its purpose.
Thank you, Chelsea. So we've got 5 minutes left. I guess from my point of view, I think what we would like to hear about is any of the current challenges that you as an organisation have in providing pupillage that haven't been covered already. But equally, if we could get the systems we've described and the support of the Pupillage Academy established, would this encourage you as an organisation within the employed bar take on more pupils if you could have the support that we've highlighted from the Pupillage Academy? Andrew, do you want to turn your mic on?
Is that, am I audible?
You are. You are. Hello, Andrew. Hi.
Yeah. Well, can I just make a few general points? I mean, there's no doubt there's a huge problem. I mean, the idea that people should spend fortunes on loans and grants and God knows what else to get a qualification and then not be able to get a pupillage is actually appalling, because there's no doubt in my mind, I've been at the bar 53 years, the pupillage is the crowning point. That's where you really learn. So if your new academy enables chambers generally of a smaller variety who find the administration and expense too much to take on pupils, that will be a fantastic advantage. I can see too that if the employed bar want to recruit pupils through you, that's all to the good. The only difficulty I'm seeing, I mean, listening to David and Darryl, they're very much saying we want to recruit a particular person to be an employee in our organisation. Well, there's nothing wrong in that. But of course, if I was a pupil, I might want to say, yeah, hang on a sec, I'll come along, I'll learn as much as I can, but you never know, I might be fired up with enthusiasm to be a barrister in general practice, and so if you offer me a job, I won't take it. Now, how we sort that one out, I think is quite an interesting problem, but like everything, it can be sorted out. But the thing which really interests me is, I think one of the problems of the bar is that you go from pupillage to membership of the chambers immediately. And one thing, I've been head of chambers for donkey's years, one thing you find, as soon as you've admitted someone into your chambers, it's bloody hard to get them out if they're no good. And this is actually very important. Can you actually judge whether someone is going to be a good barrister at the end of 1 year's pupillage? Now, in some cases, the answer is obviously yes. In other cases, it very much, let's have a look. It would be much better if that person stayed on a bit longer and hone their skills so that after 3 or 4 years, you could say, yes, quite definitely, this person is okay. And one of the things that interests me is the new entities which the bar is allowing. Corporate entities, for example, where there's no reason why you shouldn't employ junior barristers, at least for a starting 3 or 4 years, to see how they get on. Some will flourish, some may not flourish. If they don't flourish, then the bar isn't the right place for them, and no doubt they'll find something else. But some people will only flourish after a few years, and I think we're missing a point there. Also, I agree, I think Stephen made the point, the current system of chambers is not good at finding work. It simply deals with what turns up at the front door. And we're missing out on vast tracts of work. I'm at the tax bar, specialist tax bar. I know for a fact, when you actually start talking to accountants and solicitors, all sorts of problems come up. Oh, well, we didn't think there was enough money in that one, Mr. Thornhill, so we didn't bring it along. But it's a marvellous point that needs arguing and sorting out. There's a huge reservoir of work which the bar is missing out on. And my gut feel is that we're not doing the bar a good service by maintaining the structures we've got at the moment. In fact, I would say we need a revolution, but maybe it'll come. So just go back to the general idea of the Pupillage Academy. I think it's a first-class idea. If it gives people pupillages, it's crowning their education, and it's bringing people into practice at what is, at the end of the day, one of the most remarkable independent professions left. So well done, you, and I support the whole idea.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. So any other questions or comments? I think we're just at the sort of 7 o'clock point now. I can't see any questions or hands up. David, was there anything more from you or Sandra?
The only thing I would add is that I think the Pupillage Academy is a great idea. And in answer to your question, Michaela, this would definitely, I think, help the employed bar to offer meaningful pupillages. So thank you for pursuing your efforts on that. Interestingly, there is something already comparable in existence for solicitors, a firm called AccuTrainee, which you may have heard of. So the model, I think, has been adopted and proved in another environment. So well done you for trying to make it work in the for the bar and for the young bar. We're at a time, so all it remains for me to do is to thank Stephen, Michaela and Chelsea very much for speaking with us this evening. We at BACFI will of course continue banging the drum for more employed pupillages. Very glad that you're also banging the drum to help improve the pupillage situation, and best of luck to you with the Academy. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Wonderful. Thank you, David.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.